Let me be direct with you from the outset because what we are witnessing is not a diplomatic breakthrough. It is not a regional peace initiative. What we are witnessing is the formalization of an arrangement that has been operating in the shadows for the past 11 months, an arrangement that fundamentally restructures Middle Eastern power dynamics, and an arrangement that every major Western government knew about but chose not to discuss publicly until Al Jazeera published the leaked documents on April 14th. I am looking at a 47-page diplomatic memorandum that has been circulating among regional intelligence services since June 2025. What it shows is not a ceasefire agreement, it is not a normalization treaty, it is not a trade partnership. What it shows is a comprehensive security coordination framework between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China that effectively creates a new defense architecture across the Persian Gulf, one that operates independently of American oversight, one that redirects approximately $220 billion in annual energy transactions away from dollar denominated contracts, and one that establishes joint naval patrols in waters the United States Fifth Fleet has controlled since 1995. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this agreement represents the most significant geopolitical realignment in the Middle East since the Camp David Accords, why Western intelligence agencies have been tracking its development for nearly a year while their governments remained publicly silent, and why the consequences are already showing up in oil futures markets, currency valuations, and the strategic calculations being made right now in Washington, London, and Tel Aviv. This is the kind of analysis you will not find in 3-minute news segments. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by American strategic planners, and the implications extend far beyond the Middle East. Let's start with geography and infrastructure because understanding what this agreement actually controls requires understanding the physical architecture of global energy flows. The Persian Gulf contains approximately 48% of the world's proven oil reserves and 38% of global natural gas reserves. Every single day, roughly 21 million barrels of crude oil transit through the Strait of Hormuz. That represents about 21% of global petroleum consumption. To put that in perspective, if Hormuz closes for even 72 hours, the International Energy Agency estimates global oil prices would spike by $40 to $60 per barrel within the first week. The agreement leaked by Al Jazeera establishes what the document calls a trilateral maritime security zone extending from the Strait of Hormuz north through the Persian Gulf to the Shat al-Arab waterway. This zone will be patrolled jointly by Saudi, Iranian, and Chinese naval vessels under a coordination protocol managed through a joint operations center to be established in Muscat, Oman. According to the leaked memorandum, and I am reading directly from page 12 of the document here, the security zone is designed to ensure freedom of navigation for all commercial vessels while reducing reliance on external security guarantees. That phrase, external security guarantees, is diplomatic language. What it means in operational terms is American naval presence. The United States currently maintains approximately 40 vessels and 28,000 personnel assigned to the Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain. This agreement does not explicitly demand American withdrawal. It does something more sophisticated. It creates an alternative security framework that makes American presence functionally redundant. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of detail anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China actually negotiated because the security component is only one pillar of this arrangement. Announcement number one, the Energy Redirection Protocol. And this one matters more than anything else because it restructures how Middle Eastern oil reaches Asian markets. The leaked documents detail what they call the Eastern Energy Corridor, a comprehensive framework for redirecting Saudi and Iranian oil exports eastward through coordinated shipping routes, joint storage facilities, and most significantly, non-dollar transaction mechanisms. According to Bloomberg reporting from April 16th, which cited three sources familiar with the negotiations, approximately 65% of Saudi oil exports to China will transition to yuan-denominated contracts over the next 18 months. Iran, which already conducts most of its Chinese oil sales outside the dollar system due to sanctions, will formalize these arrangements under the same framework. The numbers are staggering. Saudi Arabia currently exports roughly 1.8 million barrels per day to China. Iran exports approximately 1 million barrels per day to China, though much of this has flowed through sanctions evading methods. Combined, that represents 9 million barrels per day, or about $106 billion annually at current prices, shifting away from dollar denominated contracts. Dr. Niu Xinchun, director of Middle East Studies at the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations, stated in an interview with the South China Morning Post that this represents, and I am quoting him directly here, the largest single de-dollarization initiative in the energy sector since the establishment of the petrodollar system in 1974. China currently operates 19 crude oil storage facilities across 6 provinces with a combined capacity of approximately 550 million barrels. The leaked documents indicate China will construct 4 additional strategic petroleum reserve bases, 2 in Fujian province and 2 in Guangdong province, specifically designed to receive Saudi and Iranian crude under this new framework. Construction contracts, according to Reuters reporting, have already been awarded to China National Petroleum Corporation subsidiaries. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the Joint Infrastructure Development Fund. This is the part that financial analysts in London and New York have been tracking with considerable alarm. The agreement establishes a $280 billion development fund capitalized through equal contributions from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the China Development Bank, and a newly created Iranian sovereign wealth mechanism that will consolidate revenues from oil exports to China. This fund will finance port expansions, pipeline construction, refinery upgrades, and telecommunications infrastructure across what the document calls the Eastern Corridor states, which include Iran, Iraq, Oman, Pakistan, and potentially Syria. The Financial Times reported on April 17th that Saudi Arabia has already committed $93 billion to the initial capitalization. China has committed $94 billion. Iran's contribution will be structured through future oil revenues, essentially creating a resource-backed financing mechanism similar to what China has used in Venezuela and Angola. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the strategic implications become impossible to ignore. This is not simply an investment fund. According to the leaked memorandum, page 23, the fund operates under governance provisions that require unanimous approval from all 3 parties for any major disbursement. That creates, in effect, a mutual veto system where Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China must coordinate their regional infrastructure priorities. That level of coordination implies strategic alignment far deeper than a simple commercial partnership. What makes this particularly significant is the timeline. According to documents analyzed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, preliminary negotiations began in November 2024, just 8 weeks after the United States announced it would extend military support packages to Israel through 2027. The correlation is not coincidental. Multiple regional diplomats, speaking on background to Al Jazeera, indicated that Saudi Arabia began exploring alternative security frameworks specifically in response to perceived American overcommitment to Israeli strategic priorities at the expense of Gulf Arab security concerns. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The agreement includes what the document calls a regional dispute resolution mechanism, a binding arbitration framework for territorial disputes, resource allocation conflicts, and security incidents that explicitly excludes American or European mediation. Article 7 of the leaked agreement, spanning pages 31 through 34, establishes a permanent arbitration council composed of representatives from Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, Oman, and Pakistan. Any disputes between signatories or associated states must be submitted to this council before any appeal to international bodies or external mediation. The Council's decisions are binding under the terms all parties have accepted. Think carefully about what this represents. For the past 75 years, the United States has functioned as the primary security guarantor and dispute mediator in the Persian Gulf. American military presence, American diplomatic pressure, and American security commitments have defined the regional order. This agreement creates an alternative system. It does not explicitly exclude the United States, but it establishes a framework where American involvement becomes optional rather than essential. Dr. Sanam Vakil, Deputy Director of the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House, wrote in an analysis published April 18th that this arrangement constitutes, and again I am quoting directly, the most significant challenge to American primacy in the Gulf since the Iranian Revolution, because it does not confront American power directly, it simply builds around it. The reason this agreement remained secret for 11 months is the same reason governments are now scrambling to respond to its disclosure. It is politically toxic. Saudi Arabia cannot publicly acknowledge deep security coordination with Iran without inflaming domestic constituencies and regional rivals, particularly the UAE and Bahrain. Iran cannot publicly celebrate partnership with Saudi Arabia without appearing to abandon Palestinian solidarity and resistance rhetoric. China cannot explicitly trumpet the creation of an anti-American security framework without triggering confrontation it prefers to avoid. And the United States cannot acknowledge that one of its most important regional partners has been constructing an alternative security architecture without admitting a catastrophic intelligence and diplomatic failure, so the agreement was negotiated quietly, implemented incrementally, and denied publicly until Al Jazeera obtained the documents and forced the issue into the open. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines because there are two stories playing out simultaneously and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The surface story, the one you will find in 3-minute segments on CNN and the BBC, focuses on Saudi-Iranian rapprochement as a Chinese-brokered diplomatic success. That narrative is not wrong, but it is incomplete. It treats this agreement as a bilateral reconciliation facilitated by an external mediator. That framing misses the actual architecture of what has been constructed. The deeper story is about structural power transition. What we are witnessing is not China mediating between Saudi Arabia and Iran. What we are witnessing is all three parties constructing a regional order that reduces American influence not through confrontation, but through the creation of parallel institutions that make American involvement less necessary. Consider the timeline of American responses. On April 15th, one day after the Al Jazeera disclosure, the State Department issued a statement saying the United States welcomes any diplomatic efforts that reduce regional tensions. That is diplomatic boilerplate. On April 16th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave a press conference in which he stated, and I am quoting, "We have been aware of dialogue between regional partners, and we support their sovereign right to pursue diplomatic initiatives." Notice what that statement does not say. It does not say the United States was briefed on the specifics. It does not say the United States was consulted on the security provisions. It says we have been aware of dialogue, which is a carefully constructed phrase that acknowledges knowledge without admitting exclusion. On April 17th, anonymous Pentagon officials told the Wall Street Journal that the United States had been monitoring the negotiations through intelligence channels but was not invited to participate. One official stated, and again I am quoting, "We were tracking the process, we were not shaping the process." That is an admission of strategic marginalization. European responses have been even more revealing. On April 18th, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom issued a joint statement expressing concern about regional security arrangements that do not include multilateral consultation with traditional partners. That phrase, traditional partners, is diplomatic code for NATO allies and the United States. The statement went on to call for transparency in regional initiatives that affect international energy markets and maritime security. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States conducts a military operation and its closest European allies not only refuse to participate but issue statements criticizing lack of consultation, that is a diplomatic crisis. When Saudi Arabia negotiates a comprehensive security framework with Iran and China, and European allies are reduced to issuing statements calling for transparency after the fact, that is not ambiguity, that is not diplomatic nuance, that is a verdict on shifting power dynamics. Israel's response has been the most alarmed. Prime Minister Bezalel Smotrich gave a speech on April 19th in which he described the agreement as a strategic encirclement and called for immediate consultations with Washington. The Times of Israel reported that Israeli intelligence had been tracking the negotiations since February 2025, but had failed to convince American counterparts of the agreement's significance. One unnamed Mossad official told the newspaper, "We were ringing alarm bells for months. Nobody in Washington wanted to hear it because it contradicted the narrative that maximum pressure on Iran was working. If you own a vehicle or rely on freight transportation, what is happening in the Persian Gulf is not a foreign policy story. It is a gas price story. If you operate a business with any logistics component, it is a cost of goods story. These effects are already showing up in futures markets. West Texas Intermediate crude oil futures rose $2 per barrel in the 72 hours following the Al Jazeera disclosure. Brent crude rose $7 per barrel. Those increases reflect trader anxiety about what this agreement means for the stability of existing supply chains and the reliability of dollar-denominated oil pricing. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same: the Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers in ancient Greece, went to war in 431 BC. The conflict lasted 27 years. Both sides were exhausted, infrastructure was destroyed, treasuries were depleted, entire generations were lost to combat. And who won? Macedon, Philip II of Macedon, and later his son Alexander, rose to dominance over a fractured Greek world because the two great powers had destroyed each other's capacity to resist. The parallel here is exact. The United States and China are not at war, but they are locked in what analysts call strategic competition. Both powers are expending enormous resources positioning for advantage. The United States maintains military commitments across Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific, stretching budgets and personnel. China is investing hundreds of billions in Belt and Road infrastructure, naval expansion, and technological development, straining its economy. Both powers are focused on each other. And while they focus on each other, regional powers are building their own frameworks. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, India, Pakistan, these are not passive pieces on a great power chessboard. They are sophisticated actors pursuing their own interests. This agreement is evidence that they are no longer waiting for Washington or Beijing to define regional order. They are constructing it themselves, using great power competition as cover. The United States is Athens, economically powerful but strategically overextended. China is Sparta, rising but not yet dominant. And the regional powers, the ones everyone assumes will simply align with one bloc or another, are Macedon, building strength while the giants exhaust themselves. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1: managed accommodation. The United States acknowledges that Gulf security dynamics are changing, accepts reduced but not eliminated influence, and negotiates its own role within the new framework rather than attempting to dismantle it. This would require significant diplomatic humility and a willingness to share security responsibilities with China. The Biden administration struggled with this approach. The current administration has shown even less willingness to embrace multipolarity, likelihood low, approximately 20%, and declining as domestic political pressures intensify. Path 2: confrontational pushback. The United States attempts to fracture the agreement by offering Saudi Arabia enhanced security guarantees, increased arms sales, and diplomatic support in exchange for withdrawal from the framework. This approach worked during the Cold War when American economic and military dominance was unquestioned. It is less clear whether it works in 2026 when China is Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner and when regional powers have viable alternatives. This path risks accelerating the very dynamic it seeks to prevent by forcing Saudi Arabia to choose between Washington and Beijing. Likelihood, moderate, approximately 45%, particularly if political pressure from Israel and domestic hawks increases. Path 3: parallel framework construction. The United States works with remaining partners, India, UAE, Bahrain, potentially Egypt and Jordan, to build an alternative security and economic framework that competes with the Saudi-Iranian-Chinese arrangement. This is the most resource-intensive path, requiring massive investment in infrastructure, security commitments, and diplomatic capital. It also risks creating a fractured Middle East with competing blocs, which historically has been a recipe for proxy conflicts and regional instability. Likelihood, moderate to high, approximately 35%, as it allows Washington to appear proactive without requiring immediate confrontation. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest, not because it is the most effective strategy, but because it aligns with domestic political pressures and institutional inertia within American foreign policy establishments. But path 2, if pursued aggressively, likely accelerates the transition it seeks to prevent. The harder the United States pushes Saudi Arabia to choose, the more attractive the alternative framework becomes, because it offers something American partnership increasingly cannot: autonomy from great power competition. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, can the United States maintain its role as primary security guarantor in the Persian Gulf if major regional powers have constructed alternative frameworks that function effectively without American participation? Second, what happens to the petrodollar system if 15 to 20% of global oil transactions shift to yuan or alternative currencies over the next 3 years? And third, are we witnessing the early stages of regional multipolarity, where middle powers build their own security and economic architectures independently of great power preferences? Tell me in the comments what you think the administration does next. Tell me if you believe this agreement holds or fractures under American pressure. We will keep tracking every development in the Gulf, watching Iranian nuclear negotiations, monitoring Chinese naval movements, and analyzing economic data that reveals what governments will not say publicly. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Middle East beyond the headlines. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, because this story is just beginning and the consequences will reshape global energy markets, currency systems, and strategic calculations for years to come. We will see you in the next analysis.